And we're recording. Today the plan is to talk about Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which, by the way, not a poem. It was not a poem. Nor is it a short story. I would consider it to be probably if not a novella, if not a novel, at least a novella.
Okay, what's the difference between a novella and a novel?
It really is sort of
The pronunciation.
No, I mean it's not even really an official designation. A novel generally has characters and a complete story arc, and it feels like a complete world usually. I don't know why the way I tucked in my shirt just doesn't feel right. It's going to keep moving. It's a complete world, and so I would consider this really to be more of a novel. But some people call it a novella just because of its length, but a novella usually to me seems like it's part of a larger story, but you're not getting like the full thing. That's generally how I've thought of novellas. Sometimes they can be considered like really long short stories. The designations between them are not really scientific or super well laid out. They tend to vary with whomever is using them. I think even if I looked up the word, it's not going to have like a word length in the dictionary. It's going to say like a short novel. A story with a compact and pointed plot, a work of fiction, and intermediate in length and complexity between a short story and a novel. See, it's just like, it doesn't have direct definition, like exact definition. I mean, it does have a definition. Okay, so let's talk about first before we get into Heart of Darkness, though. I'm going to talk about grading real quick and how grading is going to work, because this is week 10, and so you notice that the research paper planning is due on Thursday. And here's how, well, I mean, I had mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned last week in this class that I had planned on doing some grading on Sunday. Did I mention that? No recollection. That's fine. I don't remember most of last week either. But I did say that I was planning on doing some grading on Sunday, but I completely did not have time. It was a busy weekend. Friday ended up taking a lot longer to get stuff done than we had thought, and so I ended up not getting home or being done with everything we had to do until like 7:30 at night. When I sat down to try to get some grading done, fell asleep. On Saturday, it was my daughter's day. We were celebrating her birthday, so we went to ice skating in McKinney. Then we drove back into Greenville and went to Shogun's. Shogun's are really good. Go into Shogun's.
That sauce they have.
Incredible. Sauce is pretty good. I thought it was the cooks, the person doing the stuff in front of you. That was amazing.
It is.
Like, that was super cool. My daughter loved it. Not just the one whose birthday it was, but the little baby daughter was just staring, like, at all that stuff happening. She just loved it. Everybody loved it. The food's amazing. My gosh, incredible. Yeah, he was my cook. I was trying to do like a silent shout out if he didn't want my direct shout out. Yeah, I walk up to the table and it was like, oh, Luis is here and he's cooking my food for me in front of my face. This must be nerve-wracking. I didn't know if it was, like, if your teacher's like, you're like, holy crap, if I give him food poisoning, I very well could be an F with a lesser teacher. I would never grade badly if I got food poisoning. So next time, if you want to give me food poisoning, totally will. It'd just be sad if I died. So we ended up having a long day that day. When I got home that night, I had already planned not to do anything that day, so I didn't add anything to it. And then on Sunday, I completely forgot my niece's birthday was that day. Completely forgot. I just forgot we had to do something for it. I knew it was like we were doing something. I just thought it was like, but we had to go to Greenville and go to Shenanigans and do bowling. Because she's 7, and I guess bowling's something 7-year-olds want to do. I didn't really. I played it against children. I did, because we only had enough for one full game, 4 children and 4 or 5 adults, 6 adults. I was beaten by all the children. I thought that I could still bowl. I apparently cannot. I bowled a 47. The highest game I ever bowled was a 162, but no, I bowled a 147 that day. It was very embarrassing.
A 147?
No, a 47. That means I averaged 4.7 pins per frame. I threw 3 double gutters. Terrible. It's awful. And they were like, "Oh, you insisted on no bumpers." I was like, "I still maintain that we should not have had bumpers." I'm glad that I made that decision. To be honest, highlight of the weekend still was Shogun's. That was fantastic. I can't emphasize how good that food was. It was incredible. It was really good. In fact, that night we got leftovers to go, and we ate them like an hour after we left. We were like, "It's just so good. We want to eat it now." And we felt super full and really kind of pissed off that we did that to ourselves. It was delicious. And so all the planning that I had planned to do on the weekend, which was to get some grading done, ended up kind of going out the window. Couldn't get that done. And so Monday night, I realized that as a result of the long weekend, I didn't get a chance to upload the videos and completely had forgotten. And I had one of my students tell me, "Hey, I tried to look at the videos from last week and they weren't there." And I was like, my bad. And so I uploaded those last night. And then also people had needed quizzes open as a result of the grade conferences. They emailed me and I got those open for them. And so that took a long time because I had a lot to do for people. And so I got those open and they started working on it. So tonight is when I plan on actually getting some grading done. And I won't be doing my 2-hour bike ride, apparently. Or I'll be doing it on the indoor stationary bikes. There's no wind, no nature. It's all stagnant and need a fan or something.
And it will get your heart racing enough to burn the calories. Okay?
Drive a Jeep?
Yes, my Jeep. I almost died.
Oh.
Twice.
And because of the rain?
Yes, I had to take an exit, and the dodo bird in front of me slammed on his brakes. And for me not to hit him, I had to slam on my brakes. And when I did, I turned sideways and just almost slid into a guardrail. It's just rain, really.
I saw some.
Well, if it was snow, I understand. That's completely life-changing.
I saw some people stopped on the side of the road. I thought, it's not raining that hard.
It's not that bad. It's really not. It's like.
It wasn't like a torrent.
I learned after driving in Colorado, I learned that people in Texas don't know how to drive at all. Everyone in Texas are all stupid when it comes to driving.
We're pretty good at daylight.
Normal.
Hot daylight. Yeah, we're pretty good at driving in that. Although we do drive more aggressively in general.
Mm-hmm.
I know in Colorado, if the lane is, one lane is closed down, there's no build up or stop up because everyone's like, "Oh yeah, it says get over," and they get over.
Yeah, no, that's
They don't just stop and hope they can cut in front of everyone.
I imagine in people in Colorado, those runoff lanes for the mountain. I always imagine when people go on there, they go like, "Whoops, the daisy," or so, "Didn't judge that one right. Oops." In Texas, would be like, "Ah!" Just rage, pure rage. But tonight I plan on getting some grading done. And actually, what I'll do first, and this is how I always grade when it comes to research paper grading season, is I like to grade the research paper plannings that I have submitted first. So if you submitted a planning over the weekend or anything, I'll grade it first. Of all the classes, I'll go to do the research paper planning for every single class and whoever's turned one in. Then I'm going to go back and try to grade submissions, late submissions and revisions. So if you notice, you're like, "Hey, he said he's going to grade, my paper's not graded yet." It might be because I'm doing plannings. Yes.
1302, you just put the thesis down on the bottom of the works cited. I did not do that. I'm planning. Is that okay?
You have it in the comments box?
Yes.
That's fine. Yeah, I only said that if you have it on the bottom of the works cited, I said that's kind of like a good insurance policy because you've got it in one place and the other in case you forgot one. And so not having it's fine. I mean, as long as it's in one place, I can see it. That's good. In fact, I prefer it in the comment box.
If we get data off of the database, not on the database,
yeah.
It's credible, can we still use it? PewResearch.org, I know is credible.
Yes, depending on the stuff, most government research that's done is pretty good. If you see a partisan bias, though, you may need to, be wary whether that seems to skew liberal or conservative. But things like Pew Research Center should be fine as long as you're not citing polls, because polls, even the way that they poll, can be inaccurate. I stopped trusting polls as much as I did when they were Hillary Clinton was polling well ahead of Trump going into the election, and Trump ended up, of course, winning. So the polls were quite wrong. So polling always, there's a margin of error there, and asking people how you're going to vote versus how they really vote, and then how many you're polling.
I thought the whole thing was Hillary won by popular vote, but the Electoral College basically decided against what everyone in America wanted.
No, because she won the popular vote, but that's not how America's set up. It's set up where essentially the states all have sort of a voice equivalent. So I mean, you might win a state's vote. It's so the states have proper representation, I guess. Because let's say that California's got, what, 30, 35 million people? Maybe even more. I think it might be 42 to 50 million people. And so California's huge. In California, let's say that they vote 90% Democrat. That could cause the popular vote to soar to whatever. They could have been basically deciding every single election. But in having an electoral college where you get so many votes based on your state, that is sort of tied to your amount of popular votes, but it still gives those other states kind of a voice, so that essentially you get all your electoral votes if you go 90%, versus like another state. I don't know. I feel like I'm explaining this wrong.
Well, so the way I'm always going to look at the electoral college, without it, people would only literally have to campaign like in huge cities. They would not bother about getting like suburban areas, because the cities have the millions and millions of people.
Right.
And that's all. If it was just by popular vote, all they would want is like the big cities with a huge amount of population. They wouldn't even care about like small states. They want to get they want to get as many electoral votes as they can.
Yep.
So that's what. Really
That's
matters.
partly how Trump won the election, at least on the campaign part of it, because he campaigned in those swing states, and there were some states I think that Hillary had.
They thought she was going to have.
They thought she was just going to have because she should, but they were like Rust Belt states, and he was pushing industry. He hasn't, of course, kept any of the promises that he's made. Which I mean,
Infrastructure at?
What?
Where's that infrastructure at?
Yeah, or where are those jobs you're bringing back? They're still pushing out the jobs just as much as they were, even in spite of getting extra tax money. It's one of those. A lot of politicians, they generally will make promises they can't keep. I mean, that's generally how it works. I mean, it's just politics in general. But I mean, the Electoral College was to protect the little guy. I can't remember why we were even talking about this. Do y'all? Polls as a form of research, yeah. So they can be risky in that regard. But I mean, that's true of all statistical evidence, I guess. It's just that I don't think that those polls have methodology involved and all those sorts of things, like a normal research study would. But their research studies that they do, I think, do involve all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess use your good judgment. If I say I want scholarly peer-reviewed journals from the databases, and you go outside the database to find a source here or there, try to make it as close to the credibility of that one as you can.
I can't really find what I'm looking for
In the databases?
on the databases at all. It's I'm getting bits and pieces of things I can put together. It's I can that's useful for the paper, but it's not the whole. It's just that one little bit from the whole article is useful, and it's I have to read 6 different things and plus 6 different sources just to get the data I need.
It's unfortunate you don't have access to. I wish we had some kind of partnership where if somebody committed to, I don't know, what college you going to after this?
An idea, probably UNT or UT Dallas.
Okay, so it wouldn't help you. But I was saying I wish we had some sort of partnership where if you did an early signing or something with A&M Commerce, promising to go there with some reasonable, if something happened and you couldn't go there anymore, they couldn't major penalties, but it'd be cool if you could do an early commit, and that would give you not just access to our databases here, but also their databases there.
I think you can. If you have a student ID.
Yeah.
And then Yeah, if you have a student ID, you could technically do it.
The problem is I have a student ID and I've logged in and I can't get on the databases. No, it only works when you're currently a student.
Okay. I took dual credits last semester through them, and so they never really closed down anything, so I can probably use it.
Oh. That might work for you, at least while your degree is still open. I noticed that whenever I was in school, if there was a semester where I wasn't taking classes, it was turned off for me at the beginning of the whatever semester that was in. So I could do research in the off season, but I had to be actively taking classes. But it'd be nice if we could, because I know that they have access to more stuff. And if you were taking a class over there at the same time as here, we could do that. But I mean, it'd be nice if we had like the access to the greater research, since that's the institution you're going to go to. That'd be cool. And if anybody has access to A&M Commerce's databases, you can use those. If you know somebody who could get you access, or you know a guy. Because I know that they do have access to more stuff. I don't know how much more stuff, because community colleges have been feeling the funding pinch for a long time. Just recently, that's moved to the universities where they're starting to feel the funding pinch as well, and they're being told to spend less money. And I don't know exactly in what ways they're reacting to that news. They might be going, kill the library first, or kill it. No need for databases. But I don't think that they would do that. I think they're probably doing print journals first, but they've been doing that for a while. Anyways, we should probably move on to Heart of Darkness.
We started yet?
We've been waiting for you to come in, Jesse.
Well, I mean, we were talking about research, so it was relevant to what we're talking about. Oh, no, that wouldn't work because y'all haven't read that story.
Like, the attendance list though, because it wasn't here when you didn't roll.
Yeah, I'll do that. In fact, I can do that now because I never put the screen on the video, so I can just open it.
News articles we can use them, right?
News articles you can use as long as I feel that your topic is one where news is necessary.
I'm doing like religion and politics, and Trump just signed a bill that's allowing tax-exempt churches to sponsor presidential candidates. And before it was, they would take away your tax-exempt status if you sponsor, presidential candidates. Like, you can talk about it and it's fine as long as you're not supporting one particular party.
Yeah.
Trump signed a bill so that those churches can now be tax-exempt and also support a political party. Which I'm like, that's like.
Are contributions you make to a political campaign, are those tax exempt, or do you have to pay tax on those?
I think they're.
I don't make contributions to.
Yeah. I'm not exactly.
I honestly don't think that they are. I think that charitable contributions you make are tax exempt, but I don't think that. That kind of worries. I partly think that he is an executive order he signed or a bill from Congress.
It's probably an executive order. I just read it and was like, okay, I just got the gist of it.
Like just today, because I'm curious if I have anything about that.
12 plus, research things on papers I'm looking through. So.
Chinese space station, former Supreme Court justice.
It may not have been as recent as I'm thinking.
May have just been talking about it. I don't know if it's actually been signed yet. If it's been signed, then it's an issue. If it's not been signed, then it wouldn't be one to use. But the thing about it would be, I think that it would eventually get struck down by the Supreme Court because if you have to pay taxes on campaign contributions, but churches don't have to pay taxes on campaign contributions, then that would essentially turn churches into a money laundering service where you just give your money to the church and then it donates to the campaign.
That's what I was looking at it as, and I was like, that's not.
Although there are campaign contribution limitations, you can only donate so much. Maybe that would limit the church into only donating like this much, so that you can only have that happen for like one person.
Well, see, but my whole issue with it is that since most of America are Christians, that if churches are allowed to sponsor a presidential candidate that could completely throw out of balance all things. So I know Democrats generally aren't very gaudy people, but Republicans will always throw it in every third sentence.
What in every third sentence?
Oh, like God.
Oh, when you said gaudy, I thought you meant I was thinking like the word gaudy, like God.
Why?
I know what you meant. I know what you meant.
I thought you meant gaudy, like. Glamorous.
But yeah, that definitely would be a that would be a policy definitely designed to benefit Republicans specifically. But yeah, that would kind of make it unconstitutional. Well, I don't know. It would not technically be constitutional. It's just that the quality that you're looking at happens to affect that particular political. All right, let's talk about
I have another question.
I actually do want to mention something that's slightly off of that. Speaking of all of this, I did want to let everybody know that my department chair is coming in to observe me in our class. So she's going to get to see the wonders of instructional television.
I saw just not say a word.
Huh? Oh no, I was just encouraging y'all to, maybe that time to, try to discuss. You might notice things are slightly different than, what I'm talking about. Teachers who can observe, you ever notice like, oh, all of a sudden it's like they turned it on or something. Which my attitude will be the same, of course, but I may. No, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. It'd be different, if anything, but it's going to be next Thursday. We're going to be talking about Yates. Yes.
You might as well not do anything different. I mean, because
Thursday?
you record all your
Next
classes,
Thursday, so
so
like
theoretically.
Yeah, they could just see it all. I don't know if they know I record all my classes.
Well, you should do it
Yeah, I'll
like
probably
this
do
Thursday.
things just mostly the same. It's just, the only difference you'll probably notice is I'll probably try to keep it on track, and I'll be asking a lot more questions than I usually do. But that's probably the only difference. Yeah.
You won't go
I'll
on.
even put my phone up for that class.
Oh wow, thank you.
I'm gonna leave my phone right here for that class, just like.
Turn the ringer on, tell them.
I just wanted to warn you, if you do notice I happen to do things slightly differently, I'm not going to be like utilizing the computer and all kinds of crazy stuff, or it depends on that situation. I thought it'd be really funny. I thought it'd be really ironic, not funny, but like ironic if on that particular day, like Latydrick, you and Axton like weren't there like next Thursday, and I'm like, here we are in this ITV classroom with nobody on the other end. So I thought it'd be kind of an interesting, like hilarious thing, but I don't want that to happen. Don't do that. All right. So now we can go ahead and get to Heart of Darkness. I think next week I'm going to try to save like the poems that people usually like on next Thursday when we talk. When she's here.
24.
The poems I really like are No Second Coming, or Second Coming, and what was the other? There's another really good one. Oh, Sailing to Byzantium. I like talking about that one as well. We'll probably end up talking about those next Thursday. I'll leave off the really good ones that I like talking about, and probably y'all will end up liking talking about too. Was that grammatically? Was that English? I think that was sort of English. Okay, so we're talking about Heart of Darkness. I guess I want to, beyond the obvious that was mentioned in every singles post, which was the word long, your opinions on Heart of Darkness, because I understand that people thought it was long. Beyond long, what are some other opinions? The funny thing, I don't even think I've said the word long as many times as it appeared across all the discussion posts yet. I think I have to say it like 7 or 8 more times. Thoughts on Heart of Darkness? Huh? I mean, I have your thoughts written down here.
Hold on, there was only 3 discussion posts at like 5 o'clock, so there wasn't that many
I know,
posts
like,
at
I
that point in time.
I had to reply twice to the same person.
I did notice that you did that. At the end you said, I guess I'm just going to do my second reply here, Nichols.
I was like, I have no time. I can't come back.
You're like,
on
I got work, or you didn't say you had work, but I assumed it was some kind of thing like that.
No, I had no homework.
No, okay.
And a day, okay?
And a date. Ooh, we're not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
Okay.
I was about to do that whole. We're gonna stop that right now.
What if your head?
This is not high school. What now?
What if the head chair of your department or whatever is watching us right
I highly doubt that. If she is, she must be really bored. Let's just watch some Britlit for fun.
Yeah.
Well, then I'll go to like the thoughts that y'all had here. If nobody wants to say anything.
I mean, I kind of had new thoughts. Like, I kind of think like, first off, what I said in my discussion post, I just think it was a really pointless story. Like, he just told the story to his shipmates to kill time. That's like the whole reason.
I didn't hear you say shipmates at first. I was like, what? And I was like, oh, he didn't swear. He said shipmates.
Yeah. But it just seemed like he was just telling a story, and there was like no moral or anything. Like,
strangely, the narrator kind of seems to agree with you. Like in the way that the story is told, it seems as though the narrator feels relatively the same way. Did you notice that? Like every time it's like they basically all like roll their eyes, like here he goes again, and then he starts telling the story. It was almost like, oh, here Grandpa goes again. And they're like, we're all kind of stuck here. We can't go anywhere. Like we're all on the boat and just waiting.
That's the same story you told us last week, Grandpa.
And it probably is. They probably heard this one. It's like here. He probably got this one story to tell over and over again. He probably didn't have a whole bunch of them. This sounds like the main one, his go-to story.
It reminded me of that Ancient Mariner because he just goes on this. Because it's pointless. The Ancient Mariner had some sort of moral to it. Don't shoot birds. No, I'm just. But it's just like this guy telling a story going on and on. They're like, oh, seriously?
Oh, that might be fun for us to do, is then try to maybe discover, maybe there's not a moral necessarily, but that thematically, what were we supposed to get out of this? Like, what are we supposed to think that this whole experience meant? I feel like we're like the guy on the boat just sitting here listening to him, just sort of laying there, and by the time we get to the end, we're like, what was that? Like, what am I supposed to get anything out of it? And part of what I get out of it a lot of the time is I just kind of, though it's really weird because Marlowe is a fairly eloquent speaker and he says incredibly important things about what's going on, but he does also sort of drag on quite a bit and cover details that maybe aren't even necessary. And on occasion, he's just incredibly offensive. Not just in the way that he talks about Africans, but in the way that he talks about his fellow shipmates. He kind of pisses them off. Did y'all notice that? Like when I always underline that part where he's sitting there talking and they said, "Come on, be fair." Like, come on, Marlowe. Where is it? Where's that part? I think it's. Yeah, the narrator is one of his shipmates, definitely, because he says, like at some point, he says, he's the only one of us who still follows the sea.
But he doesn't like say his name. No, I don't think so.
Oh gosh, where is this thing? I know exactly where it is on the page, so I'm looking for every single page, the same spot. Well, I can't seem to find it. But basically, he makes some comment about how their jobs aren't that difficult, like the other people on the ship, and they're like, "Be fair, Marlowe," and he's like, "Oh, I just meant no, I was just like whatever." And then like he's trying to.
He's like, whoops.
Oh yeah, here it is. It's on the bottom of page 2431. Where he's talking about going up the river, whatever, and he says, he talks about the stillness when they were stuck in the fog, I think. And you get lost in the story a lot. So it's like you're into the story, but continually the narrator like pulls us back out of the story. Or I guess Conrad does. It's like you go, oh yeah, this is a story. I keep forgetting. And so he's talking about the stillness of the fog on the river, and this stillness of life did not in the least resemble a peace. It was a stillness of an implacable force brooding over an inscrutable intention. So he's saying all this incredible stuff. When you have to attend to things of that sort to the mere incidents of the surface, the reality, I tell you, fades. The inner truth is hidden, luckily. But I felt it all the same. I felt often its mysterious stillness watching me at my monkey tricks, just as it watches you fellows performing on your respective tightropes for, what is it, a half a crown a tumble? They're basically talking about like how much they get paid for all the stuff that they do, and it's like he diminishes their jobs to monkey tricks. And the guy says, "Try to be civil, Marlowe." And he says, I knew there was at least one listener awake besides myself. So it's a first-person narrator it's so weird. And he goes, I beg your pardon, I forgot the heartache which makes up the rest of the price. And indeed, what does the price matter if the trick be well done? You do your tricks very well. I imagine that guy who like basically tipped his head up was like, "Arr!" And he was like, you do your tricks very well. He's like, pfft, and just puts his hat back down and just like continues to pretend like he's sleeping. But he's not even like necessarily a nice guy, but he still does at times say things that I think are rather compelling. He has very interesting observations about what all's going on, and sometimes he seems right. Sometimes he seems incredibly racist. I mean, just sort of, it's a weird mix of, what this Marlowe guy is. And so I think even like the idea that we have this guy he's sort of, I mean, what do you call him? An unreliable? I mean, he's an unreliable narrator, but he's not even our real narrator. We've got, you never know, maybe our narrator himself, the first person narrator, the one who's sitting on the boat listening to Marlowe, just kind of doesn't like Marlowe, and he's putting a lot of words into his mouth that he really isn't thinking and saying. But you don't really know. We've got this weirdly framed narrative of all this stuff that's sort of happening, and it's very strange. Let's see. So, I mean, what was the point? I guess that's something we need to try to discover. And I don't think we're actually going to get to the point until tomorrow. Not tomorrow, Thursday. Because that's when I like to read the ending of the story out loud, because I think it makes it come alive in a way that indicates, I think, in the way that I read it, exactly why I feel what I feel about the story. So we covered Jesse's really pointless story idea. And I do think and I'll come back to this, but I do think that is part of the point. The story itself feeling pointless, like we don't really learn anything from it, that's kind of the point. That sort of is the horror. What were his dying words? Your name. Like a whole life's work boiled down to horror, and then we get your name. And you're like, what? Did y'all have that moment where you're like, what? That's not what he said. And then it just ends. In fact, you said, Angela, that he seemed to go soft. Incredibly remorseless man who watched a dude die and bleed out, and he's like, my shoe. My freaking, you bled all over my shoe. Yeah.
I had to get my shoes on.
Yeah. What do you think? You throw him over the edge, or do you? Yeah. It's just like, God, freaking shoes. This is dude like bleeding out on the floor. Yet later, that guy can't.
Didn't he say like he was like, oh,
tell a woman the truth?
He was like saying that he was just being like stupid, like he shouldn't have leaned out the window and shot back or something. He would still be alive. He was like, I shouldn't have been fighting back.
He told him to get back and he didn't.
Yeah.
He's like, well, that's your own fault.
I mean, it sort of is, but yeah, he was just so like heartless to it. He was like, maybe he shouldn't have been doing that.
And even when Kurtz died, he's just sitting there like, he's eating his dinner.
Yeah.
That guy comes and he's like, Mr. Kurtz, he dead. And then he goes, yep, and he keeps eating. Like he doesn't even stop eating. Everybody else is like, oh, Mr. Kurtz. And he's like, eh.
Like I knew it was gonna happen anyway.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's such a weird. The whole situation is weird. How and like, what does that mean? That Marlowe goes from being like this sort of hard character who like doesn't really seem to care about much other than himself and the mission. And then once he finds out what Kurtz is like, he seems sort of disenchanted with the whole idea. He's like, this is the guy. This is what we were looking for. This is the greatest like employee in the company, apparently. Getting all this ivory.
What I didn't understand was like the controversy between like the Mr. Kurtz guy and what's the guy that was like with him that was like his uncle was like the raider guy or something. And he was like talking about how he didn't like Kurtz and he wanted him to die. And then whenever Marlowe said that he liked Kurtz, then like he was like, oh, he like kind of disowned him as well. He was a member of the company, I think. Like I don't understand why he didn't like Kurtz.
Why Marla didn't like Kurtz or the other guy?
Like I think he like. Wanted
Oh,
his
it's not the
place.
captain. What's the guy? What's the name of that character?
Wasn't it like an accountant?
No, he was like a master of the something.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I don't think
Like
it ever says his name.
he has a title.
Yeah.
For some reason, I'm blanking on the title at the moment. It's like the ombudsman, or like it's not the captain, but it's something along those lines. Where it's like the guy from he's just a guy from the company.
Yeah.
The manager, I think it was, wasn't it? Was that right?
Yeah. Like what was his beef with Mr. Kurtz?
Well, I mean, I didn't feel like he had maybe I'm wrong about this, but I didn't feel like he had as much of a beef with Kurtz in the beginning of the story. It's when they arrived and they find out. I don't know. There's a movie I watched called that I love called Almost Famous. Did anybody have a chance to see that movie? It's really good. But it's a kid who's like he wants to be like a journalist. He wants to write about rock bands, and he gets one rock band to kind of let him follow him around because he loves rock bands. But he ends up writing an honest story, and they thought he was going to write like a glowing story.
Oh, yeah.
And when he gets his story done, he gets back. He hands all these like scribbled notes to like these people at Rolling Stone, and this girl's like, "What are we supposed to do with this? Like, this isn't something we can make an article out of. It's just a bunch of hand scrawled notes." And he's like, "Don't worry, I'll write an article." And she's like, "Whatever." I kind of felt like that was sort of the manager's reaction to when they found out what Kurtz had essentially gone native, kind of made himself their king, sort of. Or had been made their king. I don't even know if necessarily it was him. Has anybody read the story Shooting an Elephant? I had assigned it in 1301, but not a lot of people get a chance to actually get to it. But in a story Shooting an Elephant by George Orwell, who also wrote 1984, there's a guy who he hears he's told that there's an elephant that's I guess it's in some form of like heat, or it's like in anger mode. And it was in heat, so killed a guy, like stomped on him or something, or knocked him over and just killed him. And so they're like, you got to go shoot the elephant. And when he arrives, the elephant its little mood is over. It's like anger mode, and so it's just chilling, just eating some grass, just walking around or whatever. But by then, the whole community has come up. And so he's like, "Oh, I don't have to shoot this thing. It's not a danger right now. So if I had shot it when it was dangerous, that would have been one thing. But I don't have to shoot it anymore." And then all the people are standing around him, though, and they're like, he feels like this pressure, like he has to shoot the elephant. And so against his best wishes and his better judgment, he ends up shooting the elephant. And it's sort of a commentary on the way the people around us can sometimes affect our decisions, and we can end up doing things we don't even necessarily want to do as a result of the crowd, as a result of those who are looking at us and judging us. And I feel like that sort of could even be what happened with Kurtz, especially based on his admission, right? The horror of the horror. He doesn't seem to feel like this was any sort of triumph, right? He doesn't feel like, oh, you don't understand these people. They're good people. No, the last words he says are the horror of the horror, and he seems not to even like necessarily the people that he's sort of been made king of. It sort of just seems like he shows up and he's used almost like a political or war tool, and I guess maybe they're trying to get power over other tribes or whatever, and it has nothing to do with the ivory, and he's just like, "Can I have this ivory?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." And he just takes the ivory and starts sending all this ivory. But the manager guy goes, we use this. There are no methods. There's like, we thought we were going to show up, and he's going to be like, okay, listen, here's how we replicate this in other communities. Y'all ready? Like, here we go. And what he get is a gone native is about the only advice he could have. And it's very interesting, like how the manager seems really sort of, he's actually probably more remorseless because he's like, there's nothing here we can use. That's his only response to the whole thing. This is useless. What more stuff? What other observations, John? We'll go to what you said. I don't know if we can expand this at all, Zona, but you said the stuff he says about jobs and work and how, discovering, I guess, what was it, your inner life?
Yeah, your inner self.
Inner self. And like, that's relatable. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could expand that further and note that I guess Marlowe really throws himself into his work. He really does. That could be related to Conrad. Conrad, actually a pretty fascinating guy. People tend to equate Conrad's experience with Marlowe's experience, though not necessarily with Marlowe. He definitely says that Marlowe is a different character. But he said that constantly throughout his life he'd feel Marlowe come back, or he'd hear Marlowe's voice sometimes, and like he'd end up having conversations with this character. I don't know if it was written down or if it was just sort of in him. And it's actually, I don't know if did y'all read the stuff before the story? Anybody? Pretty weird.
I'm up enough reading. I'm not reading this. I have to read the whole thing.
If you read on page 2406, I'm going to read a little bit of things that happen here. It says, Heart of Darkness is experience too, Conrad wrote in his 1917 author's note, but it is experience pushed a little and only very little beyond the actual facts of the case for the perfectly legitimate, I believe, purpose of bringing it home to the minds and bosoms of the readers. And later he told Edward Garnett, before the Congo, I was just a mere animal. Because he had always told his aunt, or he'd always wanted to be a sea captain. He'd always wanted to go in the sea. And apparently his aunt, I think, helped him get hold of a boat somehow or get a job as a captain on a ship. And it was actually, I think, this voyage to the heart of the Congo. So he actually did this. Like this, he went on the Congo and went up the Congo. But it was to find a different guy. And it says, Conrad arrived in Africa in May 1890 and made his way up the Congo River, very much as described in Heart of Darkness, at Kinshasa, which Conrad spelled Kinshasa, on Stanley Pool, which he reached after an exhausting 200-mile trek from Matadi, near the mouth of the river. Conrad was taken aback to learn that the steamer of which he was to be captain had been damaged and was undergoing repairs. Does that sound familiar? He was sent as supernumerary on another steamer to learn the river. This steamer was sent to Stanley Falls to collect and bring back to Kinshasa one Georges Antoine Klein, an agent of the company who had fallen so gravely ill that he died on board. Sounds a lot like Kurt's, huh? Like it's like insanely similar. Conrad then fell seriously ill and eventually returned to London in January 1891 without ever having served as a Congo River pilot, so he never quite made it there. The Congo experience permanently impaired his health. It also permanently haunted his imagination. And the nightmare atmosphere of Heart of Darkness is an accurate reflection of Conrad's response to his traumatic experience. So some people even equate Marlowe directly with Conrad's actual thoughts, and I think it's one of the reasons that I haven't read it in a very, very long time. I probably should. But Chinua Achebe, who was a writer in Africa, responded to Conrad's novel by, oh crap, what was the, man, I can't remember the title of his book. I remember him, but I can't remember the title of his book. Chinua Achebe, that's how long it's been. He's known for this one book that was sort of a response. What? Doesn't make any sense. Things Fall Apart. So he wrote that book sort of in response to Conrad's Heart of Darkness, essentially saying that, or he said that Conrad's book implies that Africa like kind of the whole of Africa is this untamed, wild place without civilization, savage. And Chinua Achebe like took great offense to that and wrote a novel in response to it, essentially trying to put down all those ideas, all those stereotypes that exist in Heart of Darkness, because they do. And it sounds to me like Conrad sort of almost took it personally, the experience that he had in that one little location, and people have, I guess a lot of people have generalized that to all of Africa, but it's not, at all, how it is. And he also didn't like the way in which he spoke about Africans as though they were not people. Marlowe at various times, does he not? Right when he first sees them. Oh crap, I've lost the page just now. Yeah, so like when he first gets there, on 24:17 was the first time things actually started happening. You'll notice that like 10 pages in the story before anything was really even happening. And on 24:18 is when he actually sees the African people. He says, there was, I think, the chain gang just before this, which I won't go to. I won't describe that yet, but when he's talking the second paragraph on 24:18, he says, black shapes crouched, lay, sat between the trees, leaning against the trunks, clinging to the earth, half coming out, half a face within the dim light, in all the attitudes of pain, abandonment, and despair. Another mine on the cliff went off, followed by a slight shudder of the soil under my feet. The work was going on. The work. And this is the place where some of the helpers had withdrawn to die. They were dying slowly, it was very clear. They were not enemies. They were not criminals. They were nothing earthly now, nothing but black shadows of disease and starvation lying confusedly in the greenish gloom. And he continues on with language like that. He says, these moribund shapes. The man seemed young, almost a boy, but with them it's hard to tell. This sort of dehumanizing language where he speaks of them more as animals, or even objects in this case. They're shapes, not even really people. And I don't know if he internalized that or if he's making a commentary on that, saying that essentially the people who were there taking advantage of Africa and trying to get all of its resources, everything that it had to strip it bare and sell it, whether they were the ones who thought like that or he was someone who had been made to also think like that. That I don't know. And it's hard to tell for me, too, based on his culture or his background either. Interestingly, I think he was Polish. Did you know English was not his first language, Conrad? It wasn't even his second language. I think it was like his third. It was like Polish and French and then English. If it's not Polish and French and English, it might have been Polish and German and English, but I think it was Polish and French. And his actual name is I think Joseph Conrad. I think he maybe changed it to a C, but I think it was a K. I don't really know if that's true. But he wrote this whole story then in English after, which I thought was quite remarkable. I wonder why he chose English. Interesting choice. He's very well written too. It doesn't sound like he's thinking in a different language first. But so I don't see anything necessarily in his background that tells me whether or not he actually is racist or if he's just writing a racist character. That I can't tell. But I don't know to what degree that's related to what degree he's thrown himself in. And are we seeing Conrad's inner self? Or are we just seeing Marlowe's inner self? Is that brought out by work? Is it not? I don't know. I managed to go pretty far on that job thing. Haha. I should do this more often. Discussion posts give me lots of fodder for... Do you want to hear what I wrote for you, Mitchell? Gosh gee, this sure is a long poem, but it feels like a short story that's long, honestly, though. And sure, that's kind of the gist of what I got out of yours. It was like, gosh gee, this is long. I kind of wrote as goofy. And some of you may have opinions on this. I like this question. I won't go to the ending quite yet, but Corey specifically said that he doesn't think that Marlowe should have lied about Kurtz's last words. I don't know what everybody's thoughts are on that. I got Corey's, but I don't know everybody's thoughts. What do you think about the lying? Should he have said, "What were his last words? Please tell me." And he'd have been like, "All right, they were very sweet. Listen, the horror, the horror." Like, I mean, how do you like? I don't know. Like, what do you guys think? Should he have said that instead of? What? Oh, I totally disagree. I totally disagree because I think the ending is hilarious. But what do you guys think? I just do. You'll see tomorrow. You'll see or Thursday.
I kind of think like she was already mourning over this guy that she totally idolized. Like, I don't think it would have done any good to tell her the truth. Like, it would have probably hurt her more. So, like, giving her closure would be better for her.
It's not really very Christian, Jesse.
Yeah, why not?
I believe there's a commandment about this, Jesse.
It's not a lie, it's a white lie.
I feel it's time I help her move along more.
Yeah, that was I like that you put in your post. I never thought about it before, but maybe the honesty would help her move on. And sometimes being dishonest won't.
Yeah, it had been like a year.
I think of, and this is not a direct example of like the real world, but you might have seen The Dark Knight Rises. You've probably seen The Dark Knight, but I don't know about Dark Knight Rises, the third one. A lot of that movie functions on lies told in the second movie, and they clarify that. Like, he says, like Alfred had told Bruce that, did not tell Bruce about that letter that she wrote about how she was going to be with Harvey. And he says, she chose me. And he's like, well, actually. And so he essentially like fired him as butler right there. But I don't know if he actually thought he would go away, but he did. And also, most of the main problems of the third film happened because essentially the pretending like Batman was the one that did all the bad stuff at the end of the second movie, Dark Knight, helped them pass this law where they could essentially arrest criminals on suspicion of a crime or perhaps possible involvement so that they could crack down on gangs, but essentially get rid of due process, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. So they were kind of able to like get around it by having Harvey Dent be a victim and not the perpetrator, because everybody was like, oh, this is bad, we need to stop this. But that ends up causing the whole problem of the third film, because that's what they come back and say, like, you're giving up even the rule of law. Gotham has to be, destroyed. And the whole film is essentially based on everybody having to deal with a lie that was told. And they thought it was going to help at the time, but it actually made things much worse. And so I can see, like, what you're saying there, where it's very possible that trying to spare her feelings could have made things worse overall, because maybe now she'll just pine forever. If she hears the horror, she's like, what? No, you sure you didn't say my name? And he's like, nope. Said the horror. Really?
Why would he say the horror? I don't understand why he would say that. I just don't. If you're like about to die, like, is that really what crossed your mind? The horror. Like, what?
Maybe that's how he could boil down his entire experience, right?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like, he's not such a good person. Dies, and then he's going to hell. That's what he sees.
Oh, you see that? Okay.
He's right.
I was actually thinking it was all related to just the experience that he went through, like, going to Africa and then being a part of, at least in this story, the savage landscape that he found, and being pushed into this sort of king-like role and this, general, doing lots of killing and seeing lots of killing and heads on stakes everywhere.
See, that sounds like something that when you die, after doing that, you're going to be like, not go to a good place.
But it seems to me like it's sort of like his summation of his whole experience. You're like, okay, well, this guy is a very fascinating man who always spoke very, his little, the little Russian guy seemed really taken by him. Mm-hmm. He seemed like he was just, everybody talked about Kurt, so he's this fascinating man. He just said amazing things all the time. And then he said even like what he knew about love. Just all the discussions that he ever had with the guy were just so much gravitas there, so much importance. It all seems so important. And then to have that guy who, like, you're like, at his dying words, you're like, okay, we're going to hear all of his philosophy. Everything he thinks about the world, about life, about what it means to be a human being is going to be wrapped up in these words he says before he dies. And he says, the horror. And it's like, oh, that's disquieting. That's a little uncomfortable, depressing. That those are his last words. That's how he sums up an entire life lived, a fascinating life. Especially considering, what exactly is the horror? Have y'all thought about that? Like, what's the horror he's talking about? Eh? Yeah? What's so horrifying or horrible?
Maybe his death? I don't know.
His impending death?
I imagine it'd be the mosquitoes.
Was anybody else watch that Jumanji movie? The new one?
I did.
Yeah. Well, mosquitoes play a part, and they're in a jungle, and one dude has a weakness that's mosquitoes. I'm not spoiling anything, I don't think. And it was really incredibly annoying to me that here in Texas, okay, Texas, well, it's not a jungle, it's just Texas. But around, like summertime, when it gets like, it's hot in the day, there ain't no mosquitoes.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you get to about like right as the sun starts to go down, if you go outside, you're going to get bit like 12 times.
Yeah.
And you come inside and you're like, why are there these whelps on my feet and legs? And you're like, oh, I've gotten bit by mosquitoes. Oops, I should have, been careful about when I went outside. You what?
If you've been him, you've been dead a long time.
Well, see, that's the problem that I had with it. The problem is that he was in a jungle environment, and in the entire film got bit by a mosquito like one time.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
That was the most unbelievable part of that whole movie to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get rid of the fact that, there's people getting sucked into a video game, whatever. One mosquito in the jungle? What? No. Especially considering all the Survivor I've watched. You all watched Survivor before? When you look really closely in certain scenes, their hands and their feet are so bit up by all kinds of bugs that are there. It's got to be awful. It's got to be like some of the worst pain. Like,
The Naked and Afraid.
yeah, that show too. Yeah. Like, why would they do that to themselves? Was one of the teen moms on that show? I could have sworn that she was going to go do some show, but I don't know what it was. I could have sworn it was Naked and Afraid. She came back and like wearing a knee brace. I was like, yeah, checks out. My wife was watching Teen Moms and she was leaving for something that I can't remember what it was. But anyways, the horror of the horror. Maybe it was mosquitoes, like you said. I don't know. What do you think the horror is? Other ideas? So we've covered mosquitoes. We've covered I'm gonna die.
I think it's what you said about it is like the summation of his life, kind of what it is, and like, I don't know. And although he may have been confident and, like on top of it when he was living his life, maybe as, his life is passing through his eyes, he's like, oh man, this is, I'm not proud of the things I've done or something.
What if, and this is, what do you think that if the horror has nothing to do with his impending death? Like let's say that it doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm just saying let's say it doesn't. He's not talking about the fact he's about to die at all. What would the horror reference in his life and experience? What would the horror then be of the stuff that he has lived? What could that be? He's talking about the horror of this landscape he's at, or the horror of the way all the savagery he's seen with like heads on stakes and war and stealing ivory, or the company itself and the advantage they're taking of the natives.
You pretty much just summed up all everything.
That is a lot of that. But I mean, the question is which one? There's a lot of that stuff going on. Which is the one he's talking about? Is it all or nothing? Is it all and nothing? Is it all of it? Is he saying, is it a general statement about the way all of it works? It's all horror.
Thinking about going back to his mistress. No.
Tell her I said her name. And to have all of that. The funny thing, too, is for some reason he entrusted Marlowe with his papers, you know? And so he trusts Marlowe in some weird way
Yeah.
to do right by him. And then he says, he doesn't say the horror. What was his last words? Well, your name. Oh, man. What a funny story this is. I may actually start with that next time. Would be the ending. Did the company trade anything else or just ivory?
They're like
All I
maps.
really, huh?
They like to make maps or.
Like cartography? I don't know. I'm wondering, like, is there any major, like, the company? I doubt they're like, their whole job was like map making. I mean, I imagine it was part of it. They were trying to make maps. I don't know if that was like one of their commercial enterprises. Ivory was a commercial enterprise. They ended up being like a backup enterprise with. Oh, they were actually mining for diamonds, weren't they? And minerals. So they had all kinds of different things that they were involved in beyond just the ivory. It was just he ended up finding a whole bunch of ivory. Oh, and wasn't the manager kind of pissed off because a lot of the ivory was fossilized? Wasn't that right? Or it was like not good ivory. So we're like, some of this is okay, I guess. I think it's enough for this time. We'll talk more next time. I'll probably start off with the ending next time. I think it's the most fun thing to do. And then we'll talk about, I guess, other various aspects of it.